She was broke, exhausted, and running on nothing but fumes and stubbornness. When Ellie Reyes handed over her last 2-0 for a crumbling warehouse on the edge of town, everyone told her she was out of her mind. But under layers of dust and rot, behind a wall that shouldn't have existed, she found something no one had seen in nearly a century. What began as a desperate gamble became the discovery that would rewrite history and her place in it. Before we dive in, let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. Ellie Reyes stood alone on the gravel lot, the wind tugging gently at her coveralls. The warehouse loomed in front of her like a forgotten giant, faded siding, shattered windows, and a rusted tin roof that whispered with every gust of air. She'd just signed the deed an hour earlier at the county clerk's office. No celebration, no handshake, just a stamped folder, a ring of ancient keys, and the gnawing feeling that she had just made the dumbest decision of her life. It had taken every cent she had, $2,000 scraped together from canceled jobs, late payments, and the envelope of emergency cash her dad had told her never to touch unless it was life or death. She figured this counted. Her auto shop lease had expired. Her van's transmission was slipping, and customers were drying up faster than her hope. But this place, this warehouse, there had been something about it when she saw the listing online. Not the photos, those were garbage. It was the way no one else had touched it. No inquiries, no bids, just a cold listing on a forgotten page with 3 words in the fine print that made her pulse jump. Contents not inventoried. The front door creaked open with a reluctant groan as she stepped inside. Her boots echoed across the concrete, dust rising like ghosts in the shaft of sunlight that pierced through a hole in the ceiling. The air smelled like old metal and wet cardboard. Her flashlight flicked to life, cutting a path through the dimness. The warehouse was bigger than she expected. Rows of rotting crates lined the far wall, their corners softened by time. Cobwebs stretched like warning signs between broken rafters. Still, the bones were good. The walls were thick brick beneath the grime, and the ceiling trusses hadn't buckled. She could work with this. She wandered toward the rear wall, where light didn't reach. Her beam caught something strange, an uneven seam in the brick, just left of center. Ellie stepped closer, squinting. It looked like a doorway that had been bricked over long ago, but sloppily. The mortar didn't match the rest of the wall. The bricks weren't aged the same. Some were even loose. She pressed her hand against one. It shifted slightly. Then another. She started pulling them out, one by one, until her fingers struck metal. A rusted hinge. She'd been right. There was a door here. Her breath caught in her throat as she brushed more debris away. Behind the bricks was an old steel door, painted battleship gray and covered in layers of grime. No handle, just a keyhole near the center. Ellie dug into her pocket and pulled out the ring of keys from the clerk's office. Most were mismatched, clearly collected over decades. But one was smaller than the others, heavy, old. She fitted into the lock and turned. There was a clunk, low, deep, final. And then, with a breath like the exhale of something buried alive, the steel door creaked open. Ellie stepped into darkness, not knowing that behind that door waited a secret no one had touched in nearly 80 years. The smell hit her first, thick, metallic, and stale, like a tomb sealed in rust and regret. Ellie held her breath as she stepped into the room, her flashlight struggling to cut through the oppressive dark. The air was heavier here, untouched by sun or breeze. It wasn't just a hidden storage space, it felt like a sealed memory, buried deep for a reason. The room wasn't large, maybe 15 by 15 feet, with low ceilings and reinforced concrete walls. It was colder than the rest of the warehouse, like it had been frozen in time. Her beam swept across the floor, revealing a thick layer of dust, broken wooden crates, and scattered tools that looked decades old. Wrenches, socket sets, oil cans that had long since bled dry. Some still bore the faded logo of Wright Co., Mechanical Supply, a brand her grandfather once swore by. She stepped further in, crouching beside a stack of rusted file boxes. Most were rotted through, their contents turned to mush, but in the far right corner, Something caught the light, barely a shimmer, like a sliver of glass catching a sunbeam through a crack. Ellie crept closer, brushing aside a brittle tarp that dissolved in her hands. Beneath it was a large metal crate, sealed, scorched in places but intact. It looked military. Heavy-duty latches, reinforced corners, painted stencils long faded. She wiped away the grime, revealing a faint serial number and 2 words stenciled in block letters. Property of us Goft. Her breath hitched. She didn't move for a second. This wasn't just forgotten junk. This had been hidden, deliberately. She inspected the crate's sides, finding a latch rusted shut but not locked. With some effort, she cracked it open, the metal groaning in protest. The lid lifted slowly, resisting her like it didn't want to be disturbed. Inside, layers of thick oilskin and wax paper cushioned a strange mix of items. A black leather-bound notebook sat at the top, embossed with the initials J.A.R. Ellie, carefully picked it up. The spine cracked like brittle leaves as she opened it. Handwritten schematics filled the pages, diagrams of engines she didn't recognize, pressure gauges, heat thresholds, something that looked like a plasma distributor but designed in the 1940s. It didn't make sense. The notes were meticulous, scientific, but also coded in places, as if someone had known they couldn't write plainly. She turned another page. Tucked between the sheets was a faded photo, sepia-toned, curled at the corners. It showed 3 men standing beside a strange vehicle or device covered in canvas. The middle one, tall and dark-haired, wore a name tag that read, Reyes. Her last name. Her mouth went dry. She checked the inside of the notebook again. There, in block lettering on the first page, was a name she hadn't heard in years. Julian A. Reyes, her grandfather. Ellie's hands shook. He died when she was 9. Always quiet, always tinkering. She remembered his garage smelling like oil and stories he never told. No one ever said what he'd done during the war. But now, she was standing in it, and this was only the beginning. Ellie sat cross-legged on the cold concrete, the black notebook open in her lap and her flashlight angled between her knees. Dust hung in the air like old breath, catching the light in tiny, shimmering swirls. The more pages she turned, the more unreal it all felt. Each diagram was more advanced than the last engine layouts that defied the mechanics she'd been taught. Power sources that didn't rely on fuel or current, heat distribution patterns that suggested propulsion without combustion. And the handwriting, it was unmistakable. She remembered it from birthday cards, written in blocky Spanish-English mix, from the notes he used to leave beside her school lunch when he babysat. But this wasn't a letter. This was science. Pure, dangerous science, drawn with the steadiness of a man who knew what he was doing and knew someone might be watching. Near the back of the notebook, a section had been deliberately marked off, with a strip of cloth glued to the edge. She flipped to it and found a folded set of blueprints, large, yellowed, and brittle. She opened them carefully, laying them across the floor. Her breath caught. It wasn't a vehicle. It was a machine. Unlike anything she'd seen before, spherical core, multi-axis control arms, embedded stabilizers. It looked like a hybrid between a reactor and a weapon. In the margins, her grandfather had scribbled notes in a mix of English and Spanish. Phrases jumped out at her. Phase 2 requires tighter shielding. Magnetic field anomaly. Stabilize before ignition. Not safe for atmospheric testing. A shiver ran up her spine. This wasn't just forgotten engineering, it was classified work. Maybe Black Project level. And it was here, under decades of dust, forgotten behind a false wall in a warehouse no one wanted. Then she noticed the stain. At the bottom of the blueprint, just above the signature line, a dark smear interrupted the page. Not ink. It had soaked through, reddish-brown, dried long ago. She touched it lightly, then immediately recoiled. Blood. It wasn't a lot, but it was there. A single smudge, with the ghost of a fingerprint half buried in it. As if someone had been injured or interrupted and tried to sign the final plans. Ellie backed away slowly, her heart pounding. She suddenly felt exposed, like the air in the room had turned electric. This wasn't just her grandfather's hobby or a forgotten experiment. This was something bigger, something dangerous, the kind of thing people don't just abandon, the kind of thing they bury. She looked back at the crate and noticed something she'd missed before. Beneath the foam lining, another compartment. She reached in and lifted the divider. Below it was a manila envelope, sealed and labeled simply, for authorized continuation only. And just beneath it, an old metal badge, Department of War, Engineering Division, no date. She stared at it, mind racing. This was no accident. Her grandfather had hidden all of this: plans, parts, blueprints, blood, hoping someone would eventually find it. And somehow, that someone was her. The envelope shook in Ellie's hands as she peeled it open. The seal cracked like dried leaves, brittle from age. Inside were several sheets of parchment-thin paper, folded tightly and bound with a wax-coated string. She unwrapped them one by one, laying them across a makeshift workbench she cleared from broken shelves and crates. Most were typed reports, dense, technical, government-issued. All of them were stamped with a faded insignia. Project Fulcrum, Engineering Branch, Confidential. Project Fulcrum? She'd never heard of it. And Ellie had dug deep into historical engineering programs during her time at trade school. There were references to sites in New Mexico, Northern California, even something labeled Site R7A, all dating between 1943 and 1947. But the deeper she read, the more disturbing it became. The documents hinted at experimental energy manipulation devices designed to harvest or redirect electromagnetic fields at a scale that shouldn't have been possible back then. But that wasn't what made her stomach turn. It was the list of names on the fourth page. Dozens of them. Engineers, physicists, machinists. And right there, halfway down the list, highlighted in red ink, Julian A. Reyes, her grandfather. His name, underlined, with a single note scribbled in the margin, termination filed, 8/3/1947, anomaly during test run. Termination? Her throat tightened. She flipped through the remaining pages and found an incident report. Most of it was redacted. Thick black bars, censored entire paragraphs, but a few lines remained. Subject: J. AR reported sudden electromagnetic surge during calibration. Core failed to stabilize, resulting collapse. Triggered lockdown protocol. Subject insisted containment breach was preventable. Removed from premises under direct order. Subsequent references to subject have been erased per Directive 7, Raven. They erased him, not just removed from the program, but from history. There was no record of Julian Reyes being part of anything other than a small-town garage. No recognition, no service medals, no archive listings. They'd scrubbed him out, buried him like this warehouse, like the machine. She slumped into a metal stool, heart pounding. How had she never known? Her family said he'd come back from the war, quiet. That he'd worked odd jobs, kept to himself. That something had happened, but no one ever explained what. She was too young to ask the right questions before he passed. But now, surrounded by documents that should never have survived, Ellie knew the truth. Her grandfather was a ghost. Not because he vanished, but because someone made sure no one would ever remember what he'd done. Her eyes drifted back to the machine partially buried beneath the floor. If this thing worked or almost worked, it explained why the government wanted it erased. It wasn't just a power source. It was something else. And maybe, just maybe, they feared what it could become in the wrong hands. Ellie stood up, her hands covered in decades-old dust and truth. Her grandfather wasn't crazy. He wasn't forgotten. They tried to erase him, but she was going to make damn sure they failed. The next morning, Ellie came back with gloves, a crowbar, and a determination she hadn't felt in years. The sun had barely crested the rooftops when she stepped into the warehouse again, but the shadows inside didn't seem to care. The place still felt like it belonged to another time, sealed away on purpose. But now it belonged to her, and she was done treating it like a grave. She cleared the area around the machine slowly, carefully peeling back decades of tarp, insulation, and rot. It wasn't buried. Not exactly, it had been hidden. Disguised under layers of industrial waste, rusted shelving, and collapsed ductwork. Like someone had taken great care to make sure no one ever got curious enough to look beneath. When the last of the debris was gone, Ellie stepped back and let out a low breath. It looked like the skeleton of some forgotten invention, half tank, half generator. A rounded steel chassis with a hexagonal hatch at the top, mounted on tracks like a military vehicle. Dozens of cables snaked out from the rear, frayed and brittle, leading to a rusted control console against the wall. The machine was silent, but something about it hummed in her bones. It had weight, not just physical presence. She ran a hand along the metal shell. It was cold to the touch, even in the warmth of late morning. Panels along the side had been removed at some point, revealing internal mechanisms too complex for anything she'd seen from that era. There were rotating coils, suspended in magnetic brackets, copper filaments arranged in a spiral, and what looked like a fluid chamber sealed in thick glass. Whoever designed this didn't just think ahead of their time, they leaped past it. Ellie found a cereal plate near the hatch, partially rusted out. But beneath the grime, she could make out 2 words stamped in block lettering: Fulcrum Core. Prototype. 1. It was real. Every diagram, every blueprint, every erased record, it had all led to this. She crouched beside the control panel and lifted the rusted lid. Most of the wiring had corroded away, but the layout was familiar. Manual relays, rotary dials, even an old slot for magnetic punch cards. Whoever ran this thing had done it analog, probably to keep it untraceable. Or maybe because digital didn't exist the way it does now. Either way, Ellie could feel it. This thing wasn't just a prototype. It was a secret someone had been terrified to finish. And now, it was hers. She pulled her phone from her back pocket, ready to start taking photos, notes, anything. But as soon as she aimed her camera, the screen glitched. Lines of static crawled across it. The flashlight on the back flickered. Then her phone shut off completely. Ellie stared at it, confused. Tried the power button. Nothing. She looked back at the machine. The steel surface gleamed slightly in the dim light like it had just exhaled. A sick chill climbed her spine. The machine was off. But it wasn't dead. Ellie didn't sleep that night. Her thoughts spiraled in loops around the machine, the glitching phone, the documents, and most of all, the names on that list. Dozens of engineers, scientists, and technicians, all marked with dates. Or worse, notations like status unknown or cleared. Some names had no last recorded location, just a dash. She stayed up with her laptop, digging through every public archive she could find. Obituaries, university rosters, engineering journals, government employee registries. Most of the names didn't show up at all. The ones that did were incomplete, like someone had trimmed their life stories down to only what was safe. A few had connections to projects like the Manhattan District or early aerospace labs, but even those ended abruptly. No mention of what came after, or why their careers vanished in the late 40s. They didn't just lose funding, they disappeared. Her grandfather hadn't just been erased. He had been protected, or maybe silenced. And if he hadn't hidden the machine and the documents, all of it would have rotted away under decades of dust and silence. At sunrise, she returned to the warehouse. The air felt different, charged, like a storm had passed through while she was gone. The machine still sat in the shadows, silent, untouched, but now it felt like it was waiting. She pulled out the notebook again, flipping through the diagrams until she reached a page titled Contingency Startup Sequence, Manual Override. It was a list of mechanical actions, no digital triggers. She could do this. She was a mechanic, not a physicist, but bolts and switches didn't scare her. She went to work. Most of the access panels were stuck. She used PB Blaster and her body weight to pry them open, one by one. Inside, the wiring was remarkably preserved, protected by oil and wax seals. She spent hours cataloging connections, labeling switches, and tracing relays from the core to the console. She was elbow-deep in the conduit lines when she heard it. Footsteps. Not hers. Slow. Deliberate. From the far end of the warehouse. She froze, heart in her throat, hand still gripping a socket wrench. For a second, she thought maybe someone from the city had come to inspect the building, but no one else should have access. "Hello?" she called out. No answer. The footsteps stopped. She stepped out from behind the machine, eyes scanning the shadows between the shelves. The main door was still closed. No broken windows. No sounds. But someone had been in here, or something. She reached the office area and found the blueprint table had been disturbed. Pages were shifted. One of the photos was missing, the one with her grandfather standing beside the canvas-covered machine. Ellie's pulse hammered in her ears. This wasn't just history anymore. Someone knew she'd found it. And if they'd come once, they'd come again. She looked back at the machine, silent, unknowable, and more alive than it had any right to be. Whatever this was, whatever he had started, she wasn't alone anymore. By the following afternoon, Ellie had installed 2 padlocks on the warehouse's side doors, reinforced the back entrance with steel bars, and rigged a motion sensor over the front. Paranoia wasn't exactly her comfort zone, but neither was being watched. Someone had stepped into her space. Someone had touched her grandfather's legacy, and whether they knew what they were looking at or not, she wasn't going to let them take it. She didn't tell anyone. Not her best friend Kayla, who texted her daily asking if she was okay. Not her landlord, who still didn't know she'd given up the auto shop. This warehouse was hers. This discovery was hers. And somehow, deep down, she felt like if she shared it too soon, it would disappear just like the names in that report. Ellie was under the machine's side panel when the first vehicle pulled up. She didn't hear it at first. Her music was playing through a Bluetooth speaker, low but enough to mask the outside. But when the shadows shifted through the crack beneath the bay door, her instincts snapped to attention. She turned down the volume and crept toward the front of the warehouse. A black SUV was parked just outside the chain-link gate. Not government-plated, but close enough to raise alarms. Clean, tinted windows, no logo. A man stepped out, late 40s. Lean build, button-down shirt tucked into jeans too crisp to be functional. He didn't look like a zoning officer or a contractor. He looked like someone used to being listened to. He knocked politely. Once, then waited. Ellie stayed hidden, watching from a crack in the wall. After a minute, he knocked again, this time firmer. When she didn't answer, he reached into his pocket and slid something into the crack of the door. Then he left. Just like that. No circling the building, no looking for another way in. The SUV drove off, tires crunching over gravel like a whisper of warning. Ellie waited 10 minutes before approaching. The object he left was a business card. Matte black. No logo, no phone number. Just a name embossed in raised silver. K. Halverson, Inquiry Division. No company. No department. Just a name. She turned it over. On the back, handwritten in careful block letters, "We're aware of what's inside. Don't power it on." Her throat closed. She didn't know who "we" was. Government? Private defense? Some secret clearance level buried under acronyms she couldn't pronounce? But they knew. About the machine. About her. She didn't sleep that night either. Instead, she pored over the machine's wiring again and again, memorizing every inch of the startup sequence. She wasn't afraid of what it was. She was afraid of who else might want it. And as she sat beneath its silent core, the notebook open beside her and her hands covered in grease, she realized something strange. She didn't want to walk away. She wanted to finish what her grandfather started. Even if it meant lighting a fire no one could put out. Ellie waited until just past midnight. Not because she was afraid of being seen, but because it felt right. The kind of moment that called for stillness, for shadows stretching long across the walls, and the night pressing its weight against the world. If this was going to happen, if she was going to awaken something no one had dared touch in almost a century, she didn't want daylight interrupting it. She stood at the console, every switch and dial memorized like a song she'd been humming for weeks. The steps were etched in her head now. Coolant loop, voltage modulator, core priming sequence. No digital failsafes, no AI overrides. Just brass toggles, manual levers, and a single key ignition. That key, silver, smoothed with age, had been tucked inside a leather pouch in the notebook's spine. Handwritten on the tag were the words, "Only after stabilization." She didn't know what exactly that meant, but something in her gut said now was the time. She inserted the key and paused, her fingers trembling just slightly. 1 breath. 2. Then she turned it. Nothing happened. For a second, then tick. A single soft sound from deep inside the machine, like a clock shaking itself awake. The console flickered. Dials twitched. A relay clicked somewhere inside the core. Ellie stepped back as a faint hum began to rise low and mechanical, but somehow alive. She circled the machine slowly, watching as a ring of amber lights blinked to life along the chassis. Steam hissed from a valve that hadn't moved in decades. The ground beneath her feet thrummed with low vibrations, as if the machine were stretching after a long, heavy sleep. Then came the light. It wasn't harsh, not industrial. It pulsed soft and rhythmic through the central coil like a heartbeat, the kind of light that made her skin tingle and the air feel heavier, like stepping into a room that remembers something sacred. Ellie felt her breath catch. The machine, and responded to her. Not in a conscious way, but like it had been waiting not just to be activated, but to be understood. Suddenly, the console display changed. One of the panels, long dead and useless, lit up with green scrolling text. Letters appeared, slow, deliberate, as if typed by invisible hands. Recognition protocol engaged. Authentication. Reyes lineage confirmed. Continuation clearance. Granted. Ellie stumbled back. What the hell? The screen shifted. Fulcrum core. Online. Interface ready. Begin calibration. Y. N. Her fingers hovered over the panel. It knew her name. Her bloodline. Somehow, the machine or the software buried inside had been designed to recognize descendants. Her grandfather hadn't just built this. He'd built it for someone like her to finish. She reached out and pressed Y. And in that moment, the machine shuddered fully, deeply, as if exhaling a century of silence. Energy began to radiate from the core. Not heat, not light, something else. Something not meant to exist in this time. And somewhere deep inside it, Ellie heard a sound. A voice, not outside her, not hallucinated, from the machine itself, calling her by name. It didn't speak in words, at least not the way Ellie understood language. The voice echoed like a low harmonic inside her head, an electrical resonance that vibrated through her skull and landed somewhere behind her heart. She stumbled back from the console, breath shallow, fingers cold. The machine wasn't just active, it was aware. The screen scrolled again. No keyboard input, no delay. Initiating Echo Memory Protocol. Subject Ellie Reyes. Final message archive. Stand by. The hum deepened, and from the machine's center, a small projector arm extended with a quiet hiss. It cast a shimmering beam onto the far wall, flickering at first, then stabilizing into the grainy shape of a man in coveralls. The image was monochrome, but Ellie would have known that profile anywhere. High forehead, crooked nose, soft eyes made sharp by years of disappointment. Her grandfather, alive on film, alive in purpose, he looked straight ahead, through the projection lens, through the decades, and directly into her. If you're watching this, his voice crackled, then you've either found what I couldn't finish, or you've stumbled into something too dangerous to understand. Ellie's knees almost buckled. She leaned against the console, eyes locked on the ghost on the wall. My name is Julian Arturo Reyes. In 1945, I was assigned to Project Fulcrum. They told us it was energy research. Next-gen propulsion. What they didn't say was how far they intended to push it, or how many of us would vanish trying. The image flickered but continued, steady as ever. We weren't building a generator. We were building a gate. Ellie's heart lurched. Not to another country, or even another planet. To possibility. Fulcrum was an experiment in folding space, bending energy, reshaping reality at its weakest seams. They called it impossible. until we made it breathe. He paused, rubbing his hands together. Even in the grainy footage, they were trembling. The first activation fractured time. Not the way you think. No wormholes, no flashing lights. Just a crack in the consistency of things. Men heard voices not in their ears, but in their memories. Places began to forget they existed. We powered it down, but the damage stuck. Ellie's mouth went dry. The voice she heard earlier, was it just the first of many? They shut us down after that. Not publicly, quietly. A whisper in history. Some of us were reassigned. Others disappeared. I faked a breakdown, hid my notes, stole the core plans, buried them. He looked down for a long moment, then back up. If it's awake again, then the machine has found someone it trusts. My blood is yours, and my hope is that you'll be smarter than I was. He reached off screen. Something clicked. Do not complete the final calibration without understanding the risk. The machine doesn't just open. It remembers. It invites. And then, softer. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this in life. The projection glitched once, twice, then shut off. Ellie stood in silence, the machine's core still pulsing softly behind her. Her grandfather hadn't just left her a legacy. He'd left her a choice. Ellie didn't move for a long time. The machine still thrummed behind her, the pulse now slower, like it was waiting. The projector arm had retracted. The console was quiet, and the strange harmonic that once filled the room had faded into a low background buzz. But something inside her was louder than ever. She stared at the console's final prompt. Calibration sequence standing by. Engage primary function. YN. This wasn't just a blueprint. It wasn't just a machine. This was a message in a bottle, sealed by time, powered by loss, and delivered to the one person who should have never found it. And yet, she had. Her grandfather's face lingered in her mind, those tired eyes, the weight of regret behind his voice. He had built this thing with brilliance and fear stitched together, buried it out of necessity. But his final message wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. Ellie stepped back toward the console. She didn't press anything yet. Instead, she slid the notebook open again and flipped to the very last page. It was blank, except for a single line scribbled at the bottom in shaky handwriting. You'll know when it's ready. You always had more courage than I did. She swallowed hard. She hadn't felt brave in months. Not since walking away from her shop. Not since everyone told her she was wasting her time, her talent, her life. But standing here, hands coated in grease and past, she didn't feel small anymore. She felt like she was meant to find this. And if someone came knocking again, if that Halvorsen man showed up with more than just a business card, she wouldn't run. Not this time. She reached forward, pressed Y. At first, nothing. Then the lights dimmed, and the machine exhaled. A cascade of electromagnetic pulses surged through the room, static crawling up her arms like invisible fire. Tools rattled on nearby shelves. Her hair lifted slightly from her shoulders, pulled by something that didn't obey gravity. A spherical core at the heart of the machine began to glow. Not red, not blue, but something in between. A color her eyes didn't have a word for. And then silence. For exactly 3 seconds. Then the floor beneath her feet vibrated gently, and the machine projected one final message across the console screen. Fold initiated. Anchor point locked. A small compartment on the side of the machine clicked open. Inside was another envelope. Not manila, not stamped. Just a simple white envelope with her name handwritten across the front. Ellie. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside, 1 page. If you're reading this, you've gone farther than I ever did. Whatever you do next, don't do it for them. Don't do it for history. Do it for yourself. Because the machine isn't about power. It's about belief. Believe in the impossible. That's what makes it real. No signature, just a fingerprint. Smudged in ink at the bottom. Ellie looked up. The machine had gone still again. But something had shifted, not just in the room, but in her. She didn't know what came next, but she believed. And for the first time in her life, that was enough to change everything.